In a prior episode, we used the PeopleTools 858 notification bell as an excuse to review several CSS techniques. Our solution works, but later I was thinking about an approach and realized we could accomplish the same task with fewer lines of CSS. Basically, I found a better way. So now we have to ask ourselves a very important question. Should we improve our working code or just move on? Or put another way, should we refactor our code? Now this is such an important question. The point of refactoring is to improve code performance, reduce complexity, or improve legibility. Because someday, someone, perhaps even us, is going to visit this code to make changes. In this episode, we're going to refactor our CSS solution. When writing CSS, we want to write as little as possible. In fact, we could say that about any code solution. Write as little code as possible. But when it comes to customizations, the more we write, the more we have to maintain. If we write less code, it means we can leverage more delivered functionality, resulting in less rework. So let's consider the notification icon. In my browser inspector tool, I can see the CSS fragment we wrote to override the Oracle delivered CSS. See that sizing information? That's code we copied from Oracle's implementation. But did we really need to copy Oracle's code? Or can we leverage it directly? Let's find out. Our solution used the CSS display property to hide the image. Changing the display property removes the item from the HTML document rendering flow. Instead, what if we set the visibility property to hidden? Display none versus visibility hidden. What's the difference? Hidden keeps the image in place but makes the content invisible. If you were invisible, you would still have a presence. You would still take space and have mass. Somebody could actually touch you and find you. This is the way the CSS visibility property works. The element is still present, we just can't see it. This means we can reuse the Oracle delivered sizing CSS, allowing us to reduce our code to just override the attributes that interest us, the image. So let's start by commenting out our code. We can find our code in the user interface by drilling through the hyperlink in the CSS bar, sidebar. We can see that our code is in ps_style_def mode, and we see that our code is actually way at the bottom here. That's what we wanted. We want it to be the last rule applied because the last rule wins. So I'm going to comment out the attributes, keeping the selectors. Looking at the upper right corner, we see that the flag is now back. Okay, now let's set the visibility property of the image. Watch the flag as I type here. Watch the flag. Did you notice the flag disappeared? But the space was reserved. Okay, now let's just reapply the fragments we're interested in. The background image, for example. Okay, now we have our background image, picking up where we left off last time. And then we notice that it is not centered and it is repeating. So let's undo those fragments or reapply those fragments. And now we have our bell back exactly how we had it before. Perfect. And with fewer lines of CSS allowing us to reuse what Oracle has delivered. For completeness, let's apply that back to Application Designer. And now we can see our solution is significantly shorter. And of course, we want to refresh and make sure it sticks. Perfect. But why do this? Why refactor? Why not just leave it alone? I mean, after all, it was working before. Okay, the first reason, right now, it's fresh in my mind. So I'm in the perfect mental state to fix it. And second, I know Oracle is going to change the CSS around these icons. The less code I write, the more I can inherit from Oracle's changes. The more I clone and copy, the more I have to maintain. Now, I just have one more change I want to make. Our bell uses a solid color, and this matches perfectly with 857. But I was reviewing 858 and realized that the 858 theme uses hollow icons. So let's quickly swap the bell for a hollow bell icon, and that will set us up for a future episode. Keeping the same measurements, we'll generate, copy the same CSS, should say data attribute. Find this in the source. Update the data URL. A data URL is really just the binary image data, base64 encoded. And now we have our hollow icon, much like 858 would use. You know, for completeness, I'm going to make the same change in Application Designer. By the way, while I'm here, I want to caution you. We are here I'm using binary data, base64 encoded binary data included directly in the CSS style sheet. That is awesome for prototyping purposes. But we have to be careful of two things. Number one, I'm applying this in Application Designer. Now, the length of this item, the base64 encoded binary data, the length of that string is directly dependent on the size of my image. A larger image would of course explode into a much larger base64 generated content. Base64 is always bigger than the binary representation. So more bytes here to download. That's a problem. The other one, though, the one I really want to caution you about is the fact that I'm currently here at line 7, column 787. Application Designer has a maximum line length. It is 2,080. Anyways, it's over 2,000 characters, under 3,000 characters. Why is that important? Oftentimes, I copy minified files, like, for example, require.js, which we used in a prior episode. And I might try to apply that library here in Application Designer. Application Designer will insert artificial line breaks at that line length limit, breaking the file. And the same thing would happen here if I had a much larger image, base64 encoded, and then embedded in my CSS. So that's the primary caution. Just be careful when you're inserting items into CSS or HTML, JavaScript, PeopleCode, it doesn't matter. Make sure the total line length is less than that maximum line length limitation, or Application Designer will add a line break right in the middle of your text or code. Now the other things, I mean, I've done it here. It's awesome for prototyping. I used a data URL. The other two reasons I want to avoid that is, number one, base64 is always larger than binary. The more bytes you have here to download, of course, the more data you're consuming for your users, the longer it's going to take to download, render, it's less efficient. Also, because it's embedded here, it can't be cached individually or uniquely and reused from the browser perspective. See, we can't leverage the browser cache as much when we embed images directly in our CSS. But it's awesome for prototyping. So I'm going to apply it here, and then we'll test just to make sure that it persisted. It did. I like it. You know, I actually like that transparent background with the badge better, because the white border around the badge actually shows up on the transparent bell, whereas with the solid bell, it didn't show up as much. Anyway, I'm going to set that aside for another episode, see what we can do to perhaps make the theme a lot more like the 858 theme, but used perhaps in 857, 56, 55, or even 54, depending on where you're at. But anyway, isn't it amazing what we can accomplish with just a couple of properly placed lines of CSS? The PeopleSoft user experience is written entirely in HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. Now with Classic, we pretty much ignore the web development apps aspect. With Fluid, on the other hand, it is impossible, almost impossible, to ignore CSS. Now, granted, we can rely heavily on the Fluid style library, meaning we don't have to become CSS experts. But with that in mind, we spend a fair amount of time covering CSS in our Fluid series. We introduce students to Oracle-delivered CSS classes through our Fluid 1 class, and then our Fluid 2 class makes heavy use of the Oracle-delivered CSS classes, but finishes by showing students how to write their own CSS. Now, Fluid 3 continues this pattern by spending even more time in CSS. We offer these classes several times a year, and we would love to have you join us for a future class. Now, if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe for more content. And we look forward to seeing you in the next episode.